Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. This week, we're starting a new series.
New series.
Yes.
Exciting.
Yes. This is the series that's going to run parallel to the holiday series.
Yeah.
Yes.
We just wanted to, do a little something more.
Yeah. And we're talking about pagan gods. And as you know, we just talked about Halloween being a pagan holiday, so we're keeping the pagan train going.
Yeah. We just thought we'd roll with it.
Yeah. Just hop on
Add
the
on
pagan
some more pagan stuff.
Yeah. So this week, we're going to talk about 3 pagan gods, Baal, Dagon, and Asherah. Baal is mentioned in several books of the Bible, but specifically some are Numbers, Judges, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings. Baal is also known as Baal of Peor or Baal the god of Peor, and he is first mentioned in the book of Numbers. His name means owner or lord, mainly the god of life and fertility. And a teaching moment here, because Baal simply means owner or lord, Baal is a name that could have been used for many local deities. So for example, Baal Peor was the lord of Peor, like that specific place. But it could have been, so Baal of this or Baal of that.
Yeah,
or
like different
Baal
areas.
of San Antonio or whatever, if that example helps.
Just geographically, if you can see it better.
Exactly. So Baal is mentioned in many other parts of the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament. Baal was known as the god of weather and fertility, mainly to the Canaanites. And another teaching moment here, it's interesting that he is known as the god of weather and fertility because fertility here doesn't only mean having children, but also having a fertile harvest or like a good harvest. Hence, he's the god of weather because without rain, of course, there's no harvest.
Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, so it kind of makes sense where it's like fertility and harvest. Yeah. So we meet Baal when the Israelites get entangled into idol worship and start offering sacrifices to the god of the Moabites. And the worship of Baal was also popular in Egypt, which is where the Israelites came from. So it also makes sense.
Yeah, just how they knew about it or, got involved into that.
Yeah, or like, I've heard this name before.
Yeah.
Let me go
I know
see
this
what
god.
these Moabites are doing.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So Baal, just so you have a picture in your head, if you haven't Googled it already, is typically depicted as a bull or a ram or a man with one arm raised in a fist. That's kind of what if you would look at a statue of Baal, that's what it would look like.
Yeah.
Or if you would look at a drawing of some sort or anything. When it comes to worship and sacrifice, one sacrifice that separates Baal from the other gods is child sacrifice. It was often the first male child and they were to be sacrificed by fire.
Wow.
Terrible.
That's serious.
Yes. Another teaching moment. This series is going to be filled with teaching moments. This is one of the huge differences we see between the little g gods and the true God. In the Old Testament, we see people sacrificing their children to Baal, and we also see God stepping in and preventing Abraham from sacrificing Isaac. So it's a huge difference between these fake gods
like
and
polar
the real
opposites,
God.
basically.
Right, because the real God would never let you sacrifice your children, but then these fake gods wanted you to sacrifice your children to fire.
Like to prove your love or whatever.
Yeah, and this is
them.
one of the many examples that we have in the Bible that separates our God from these fake pagan gods.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and the next little G god that we're going to talk about is Dagon. Dagon has a cool story just because it shows the mighty power of our God. Dagon was a god of the Philistines, aka Goliath's people. He was also associated with fertility, abundant harvest, and being the father of other gods, right? So this made-up god was the father of other gods.
Yeah, he produced other gods.
Yeah, somehow. The name Dagon is derived from the word dag, which means fish, and also means grain, which then makes sense why he was the god of the harvest too. So, yeah.
So Dagon is actually the father of Baal, and how all of these human-made statues were having, kids, sons, and procreating. Who knows? It's weird, but that was kind of their doing, right? But anyway, from what we found about Dagon, he was depicted as some sort of merman. So like a human top, fish from the waist down. So he was thought to be like a fish god. And sacrifices for Dagon were mostly food, animal sacrifices, and also human sacrifices. We see Dagon in several places in the Old Testament as well, but particularly in 1 Samuel. In chapter 5, the Ark of the Covenant is taken captive by the Philistines, and they take it to their city, and they placed it in Dagon's temple beside a statue of Dagon. Dagon had fallen on his face in front of the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him in his place again, but the next morning he had the same thing happen. Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again, and this time his head and hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway, and only the trunk of his body was left intact. So the power that the ark had, right, because it's the presence of God,
right?
It could, like, this
fake
little fake God
stand.
couldn't stand being in the presence.
Yeah.
So it had to bow down.
Yeah.
Because it was next to an actual, like, the actual God,
right.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, here we see the statue of this little God, you know, bowing before the true God. And I don't know about you, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
like,
it's a great story.
Yeah. You just see
like the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, and then this fake statue just has to boop. It just has to bow down. It's crazy. And then at some point, like literally parts of the
yeah, like it wasn't just
are missing. Like that's
just
crazy.
like, hey, we're gonna it's gonna bow down.
Yeah.
But because they were like, no, we want it here.
Right.
God's kind of like, nope.
He's like, this time I'm gonna break it.
Yeah, I'm gonna break it. So you see that, like, it bows down to the true God. So yeah, so the last little g god we're going to talk about today is Asherah. And Asherah you can find in a lot of places in the Bible, but some of them is in 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and 2 Chronicles. And this is actually our first goddess.
What's the news?
She goes by Asherah, Asheroth, or Astarte. The Astarte one isn't very clear. She could or could not be another fertility god, but these names, like, they're all related in some way.
Yeah, they're
like,
usually found together
probably
somehow.
like different areas called her something a little different, but it's basically the same goddess. She is associated by some with war, sexuality, and who would have guessed it, fertility. I feel like the people really wanted that, so it's like, let's slap that on to every god, right? She was also associated with sacred trees. What are sacred trees?
I'm not sure. Trees you worship, I guess. I don't know, because trees are great, right? Trees are powerful. They're rooted. They do all kinds of stuff.
They do a lot of
and
stuff.
And the way they communicate
Fruit.
with their roots and all. It's amazing. But I mean, we shouldn't be worshiping trees.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
No.
So a teaching moment here. We see her mentioned in the Bible, particularly in the mention of Asherah poles. And these poles were, again, sacred tree poles that people worshipped and sacrificed in her name. She was a Canaanite goddess, and her statue was typically of a naked woman. And the poles are first mentioned in Exodus. And if you recall, we mentioned this before, but a lot of times when the Israelites fell back, they would build these Asherah poles.
Right.
And this is the goddess they were worshiping.
Yes.
So it sounds like very, like, it mentions it a lot. And like in my mind, before we did this, or before I really understood this, it almost sounded like a type of wood, you know, they're Asherah.
Yeah,
or
like
whatever.
acacia wood.
Yeah,
it was Asherah poles.
And I was like, they're Asherah poles. I'm like, why poles? I don't know.
Right.
But it makes sense now, understanding like, oh, Asherah was the god that they were worshiping. So they put these, you know, poles to worship at.
Right.
In representation of her or whatever. And
which makes sense. Like, if you have a statue, then you worship the statue. But then because she represents somehow these, like, sacred poles, then the poles represent her. And so you worship the pole.
So then you put that in place of, you know, worshiping God, and there you have it.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
I don't know. Very interesting. But we hope that this episode kind of gives you context whenever you are reading the Old Testament, and we hope that you're reading the Old Testament because it's still important. But
like, you learn these stories. Right?
Yeah.
Like, who would have thought?
Yeah, it's it helps you see really truly what Jesus did for us when you read the Old Testament and you see all the things that they had to go through to be closer to God. And so Jesus has already taken that, you know. So we hope that you do read the Old Testament, but now we hope that you understand what these pagan gods did and what they represented better, and how these little g gods really compare to our big God, to our real God, because the things that these fake gods wanted you to do or stuff like that is stuff that God
goes against what God was doing and wanted.
He goes against, and it's stuff that you would never have to do, right? And you need 2, 3, 4, 5 gods to do something that our true God can do just all by himself, right? So we just hope that this gave you some context and that you learned something today. And we'll be back next week with some more little g gods. As always, this is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Peace.